also maybe setting some boundaries and also maybe challenging how we are doing that. And so that is actually the passage that we come to today in the book of Amos. But before we get to the book of Amos, I just want to thank those of you who are part of Christ's Table and the ministry that God's doing here. Those of you who have signed up for our email list. In fact, I sent an email out to update you on a podcast that I was able to be a part of, and thankful for that. And then everybody who is a donor, we always send all of our resources free to those people who donate to Christ's Table. And if you would like the resources and are not able at this time to financially support, just let me know, and we'll still make sure that you receive those. But please sign up for the email list so that you can keep up with everything that's going on at Christ's Table. Now, Amos, I was able to find it rather quickly because I bookmarked it beforehand, but I will say it may take you just a moment to find this book because it's kind of hidden there at the very end of the First Testament, or as some people call it, the Old Testament. Now, the interesting thing about Amos, and you may not have heard a lot of sermons or any ever on the book of Amos, is that it was kind of the first book of prophecy from a prophet that was written. And so it was a little out of the ordinary, the things that Amos was teaching and the things that Amos was preaching and saying were going to happen if the people did not change the way that they were living. And so radical was what he was saying that they said, we really need to record this. This needs to be recorded. And so it's the first in a long line of people who challenge in moments the people in order to return back to their covenant agreement with God and remind them that if you don't hold up your end of what you said you would do when you said to God at Mount Sinai, we will obey, then things are not going to go well for you in the land. You're going to have problems. And so why not just live like you were designed to live? Live by these guidelines and things are going to go great. And you're not going to be happy with the results, whether or not God's involved if they don't. And so Amos is a prophet who comes and really comes to the nation of Israel in a time of peace and excess, comfort, and great wealth. And as we know, those are times, many times, whenever we become very self-focused, and ultimately those are times, sadly, whenever we forget that we have a need. Whenever all of our needs are filled, we can feel like our needs were filled by the work of our own hands or the prosperity of the community around us or the business, and we forget that all good things ultimately come from God. And so the more that we have, really the more generous we should be. But actually, it's kind of inversely proportional. The more that people tend to have, the less generous that they need to be. And certainly the more people have, the less God-centered they tend to be. Now, that's not a principle that affects every single person who is comfortable, who lives in a state of wealth. But it can be more difficult in those circumstances to live as though God has asked us to live. And so that is the situation in which Amos finds himself, is a nation, a culture that is headed towards a very detrimental and even ultimately destructive path. And they don't see it because they have everything that they need. They're happy, they're comfortable, everything's going okay for them. And Amos says, this isn't going to last. And if you change, you might be able to circumvent the ultimate direction and the ultimate outcomes that you're running towards. And so Amos chapter 6, verse 1, and Amos wraps this around the package of food and feasting. So, what sorrow awaits you who lounge in luxury in Jerusalem, and you who feel secure in Samaria? Now, he's not saying that it is the luxury or the security that is the problem here. And so the operative word here is the lounging, the inability to actually bring your faith, your spirituality actively into this lifestyle of luxury. And so what we see here that Amos has created up until chapter 6, and now here is kind of pulling the punch on chapter 6 with these people, is it's the fact that you're not doing anything. You're just sitting comfortably and you're heading in the wrong direction, and you're not leveraging what you have for good, and you're not leveraging what you have for God. And so it's the lounging, not the luxury, that's the issue here. You are famous and popular in Israel, and people go to you for help. You're the leaders, whether you should be or not. People go to you for help. But go over to Calneh and see what happened there. Then go over to the great city of Hamath and down to the Philistine city of Gath. And so he's pointing out other cities and other places who were in the same situation at one time that the nation and the city of Jerusalem are in. And these are negative examples. Watch what happened to them. You're no better than they were. And look at how they were destroyed. Do you think he's saying that you can affect an outcome ultimately that is different than they did? You were following the same path. God has said he will not save you from these things. In fact, you're essentially spitting in God's face in the agreement that you made with God. What makes you think that your outcomes are going to be any different than anybody else who has walked the same path that you walked? You push away every thought of coming disaster, but your actions only bring the day of judgment closer. You keep doing things that are bringing this judgment upon you. And whenever the thought comes in your mind, hey, maybe this isn't going to be good, you push that out of your mind. How many people do we know who do this kind of thing? They continue to make decisions and live in the actions that are bringing difficulty and suffering into their life. And they will intentionally push away every thought or everything that warns them that this is coming. And so they set out a path and they continue to walk that path with blinders on, and everybody can see what the outcome of these things are but them, because they have intentionally blinded themselves to truth. This is what's going on here in this passage, and Amos is rattling the cages, saying, come on, wake up. How terrible for you who sprawl. It's almost like, through this creative, colorful language here, it's almost, like hyperbole, except it's not hyperbole. How terrible for you who sprawl on ivory beds and who lounge on your couches, eating the meat of tender lambs from the flock and of choice calves fattened in the stall. You are living a life of luxury and this feasting. You have the best food at your disposal, and you're simply using this food to feed yourself to excess. And part of what Amos has spoken of in the portions of the book that we've not yet read, that were previous to chapter 6, is really kind of calling them on the carpet for the way they treat other people, the way they treat strangers, aliens, refugees. The fact that these people have become so rich and so blinded of their own direction that they were intentionally ignoring the widows, the orphans, the under-resourced, were hoarding their wealth and their luxury rather than doing as God has said then, and even still says today, is the responsibility of the church and his followers to take care of these people, to advocate on behalf of these people, to give out of not just the excess, but to give out of the primary that you have in order to ensure that other people are taken care of. We don't do it today. So many of us don't, and they weren't doing it then. Eating the meat of tender lambs from flock and choice calves fattened in the stall. How could you? Amos says, you sing trivial songs to the sound of the harp, and you fancy yourselves to be great musicians like David. You do this all while worshiping in grand style, thinking that your worship is akin to David, but all the time forgetting that David's heart, though in moments he was a mess, David's heart was tuned in to God. David's worship was God-directed, not self-directed. And so, Lord, protect me here. The sound of your music is beautiful, but there's nothing godly about it. There's nothing holy about it. And yet you believe that it is. You believe that the music that you're making and the words that you're singing are as grand and as great to the ear of God as the David himself of Scripture. Woe is you, you foolish, foolish people who have become blinded to truth, intentionally rejecting what you should be hearing, which would cause you to course correct. And yet you are laser dedicated towards your own destruction. You drink, verse 6, wine by the bowlful, and you perfume yourself with fragrant lotions. You have everything that you need and could ever want. You drink yourself into drunkenness by the bowlful. You care nothing, though, about the ruin that you are causing. Shame. Therefore, because of all that I've written, because of all that you've done, that you have brought upon yourself this list of truth that you're probably going to ignore, and they do, therefore, you will be the first led away as captives. You'll be the first who are incarcerated because of this. Suddenly, all of your parties will end. There is an expiration date to your luxurious parties. Now, Amos goes on, but he goes on and the reason why I carved this passage out is because food and luxury and excess are so central to this passage. There are just a couple of things I want to point out before we go. First of all, good things abused in excess become harmful. Luxury isn't bad. A bowl full of wine, maybe, isn't bad. Eating tender lambs and the choice meat from the best calves isn't bad. But when it is done in a way that is simply you sitting at your table, eating it for yourself, not taking care of other people as God has requested and to them required that they do, is wrong. Continuing to eat and live in that way in excess, none of those things in and of themselves were wrong or were bad. But it was in excess. It was in the excess that it became harmful to them, that it became harmful to the nation, and that it became absolutely abhorrent to God. And so, make merry, feast, drink if you wish, but know that all of those things in moderation are very different than all of those things in excess. Some of us have a propensity for excess in some of these areas. It's danger. A lot of the people who are a part of Christ's table are a part of Christ's table after AA. And that goes for a lot of ministries and churches around the world. What an incredible ministry. But there's an understanding there of limits and the need to limit. And it's something that maybe we only learn about our vices, sadly, sometimes when it's too late. And thank God for those people who have learned the harm that can come through the abuse of excess. The other thing that I want to say here, with this we're done, is that it is absolutely and utterly ungodly to enjoy a sumptuous standard of living without giving a thought to the suffering of others, without giving a thought to what others eat, without giving a thought to the shelter of others, without giving a thought to how your hospitality, your giving, your involvement can help the suffering of others and their standard of living. It's absolutely ungodly. It's absolutely ungodly, I think, to throw parties and celebrations that don't take into account those who are in need, that don't invite them to the table, that don't support them in their suffering, especially and worse, even when it's willfully ignored. And so sometimes I think that we have to understand that God is a God who is centered around a table and is centered around celebration and partying and joy and peace, but it's for all people, not just for a certain group, not for an elect group, not just for those people who can afford it, but it is something that we must make ways in which all people, no matter their station, no matter their ethnicity, no matter their identity, no matter what they're currently struggling with or have struggled with, no matter what the baggage it is, in God's kingdom, all are equal. There is no male or female. There is no Jew or Greek. There is no slave or free. And is there at your table? Is there at your table? And I venture to say, if there is distinctions of who is invited or who is allowed to be at your table, and you also, part of that is because you don't want others to have a part of your excess, you want it for yourself, it may be time to do a little self-evaluation and a little self-reflection on maybe what God may be speaking through Amos to you and to me. But until tomorrow, party on wisely.